are several esteemed persons. I would first like to introduce on my right the President of the Senate, Senator the Honourable Christine Kangaloo. To my left is the Speaker of the House, Bridgid Annisette-George. And next to her, we have political scientist, Dr. Selwyn Ryan. Next to him is Executive Director of Persons Associated with Visual Impairment, Mr. Kern Tyson. Next to him, on his left, is the Clerk of the House, Jackie Sampson Miguel. Then we have former Independent Senator, Anthony Vieira. Then we have social commentator, Rhoda Bharath. We also have former Member of Parliament, Trevor Sudama. Next to him is Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences of the University of the West Indies, Cayfield Campus, Dr. Justin Robinson. And then we have Parliamentary Oversight expert, Professor Frederick Stapenhurst, and we will hear from him a little later on. And former Independent Senators, Dr. Eastlyn, McKenzie, and Mr. Martin Daly. For the past week, we have had what we call a week of activities centered around parliamentary oversight, a model for small states. And it took the form of a number of activities. The first was a public lecture on Tuesday evening, and then we had a 2-day workshop for parliamentarians, all discussing about how we can craft a model for parliamentary oversight that is relevant in the context of Trinidad and Tobago, building on international best practices. And so to get this morning's conversation started, I would wish to invite Professor Stapenhurst to talk to us briefly about his research and what are some of his findings, and to talk a little bit about how in Trinidad and Tobago our parliamentary system stacks up with what is happening internationally. Professor Stapenhurst.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I think it's important to think about the process that we have been going through over the past week in terms of what is called an appreciative inquiry. And this recognizes the good as well as the areas that need to be improved. And so the first thing I would like to do is to highlight the areas where I think that the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago is meeting or exceeding good international characteristics. First of all, I'm really struck by the strong commitment to reform by Parliament's leadership. Of course, without leadership, there can't be an effective Parliament. And I think here quite clearly the commitment of the parliamentary leaders is strong and concise. Secondly, I'm struck by the comprehensiveness of Parliament's 5-year strategic plan. It's second to none. And thirdly, within Parliament, there's an institutional structure which meets all necessary, but not sufficient, conditions for effective parliamentary oversight. So this begs the question, so why is oversight in Trinidad and Tobago not working? Why does Trinidad and Tobago rank 85th in the world in terms of the Transparency International Corruption Perceptions Index, on par with countries such as El Salvador, Liberia, and Thailand? I'd like to highlight 3 areas where I feel there's room for improvement. First of all, the macro governance structure in Trinidad and Tobago doesn't allow for a robust system of checks and balances. The oversight institutions of the Auditor General's Office and of Parliament aren't completely independent of the executive government. In both instances, they rely, for example, on government for financial and human resources. And without independent institutions, one can't have effective oversight. The second area which I think needs to be looked at is that MPs are expected to fulfill what in most other countries is considered to be a full-time job, and yet they're expected to do this on a part-time basis. All parliaments have three core functions: to represent the people, to enact legislation, and to undertake oversight. To carry out these functions effectively, MPs to be full-time professionals. And the third area that I think needs to be considered is that tight party discipline undermines oversight. In Canada's previous parliament, the government maintained very strict control over what was said by ministers and backbenchers. No dissent whatsoever was allowed. And I think it's instructive that during the 10 years that government was in power, Canada's ranking in terms of corruption fell by about 8 or 9 points. Canada's new government has promised a looser approach to party discipline. It's promised that on issues, on all issues except for policy priorities, they will allow free votes in Parliament, with MPs voting according to their conscience. Now, we'll wait and see if that happens, but I do believe that, that this approach would be beneficial in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Stapenhurst. Thanks for those insights, and thanks for sharing some of what you would have discovered in your research and making some comparisons for us. Now, the workshop that we had yesterday and the day before yesterday, we centered it around the concept of appreciative inquiry, as Professor Stapenhurst has said. And what we really looked at, just as you have said, Professor, is examining those things that work well. Because while we're saying we're working towards building a new model, if you will, in the context of Trinidad and Tobago, it is not that there aren't things that are functioning well, but we're looking at those areas which can be improved and how we can improve. And the how is really the critical element. So at this juncture, I would wish to invite Dr. McKenzie to give some opening remarks on her perspective with regard to parliamentary oversight in Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, members of the, should I say round table or circle, or whatever it is.
Not round table, please.
Let me begin by recognizing and appreciating the tremendous effort of the President of the Senate, Ms. Kangaloo, the Speaker of the House, and our Clerk of the House of Representatives for initiating this type of not only discourse, but the sessions we've had towards this very serious topic of oversight and, if I may add, the reduction of corruption and all the activities pertaining to the better governance of this country. Mm-hmm. So I want to congratulate you and to thank you for having invited me to be a part of it. Mm-hmm. I have read Professor Stapenhurst's executive summary. Mm-hmm. I have listened and looked at him on the television, and I can sort of associate with many of the things that you would have written and said. I want to say that I want to congratulate you for being honest to say that we have some good things. Because some of you people, when you come from abroad and come to us as consultants, you never find anything good. But we do have good things, and I want to congratulate you on your honesty. And to tell you that when you put these things out to us very honestly, then we can have the confidence that when your consultancy would have ended, we can carry on without you. And that should be the aim of any consultant.
Absolutely.
That when your job is finished, you would have left us with enough that we can build on the good that we have and try to improve on the areas of weaknesses that you would have discovered from your wide experiences all over the world in tasks like these. So let me say to you, thanks and congratulations. I want to say, Madam Chairman, that we are a people who like to brag on our strengths. And today I want to say that we can brag on our strengths, but we also like to confess to when we can improve. And from what we have read and heard, we can improve. We have the capacity, we have the people who can do this. We need to have the will. And I am impressed with the composition of the team, but I also would like to say how pleased I am that this discussion is being beamed outward from this chamber.
Good.
That our people out there who are listening and looking would feel confident that they have a part to play in the development of this model.
Yes.
That I would like to say later on what I think about it.
Yes. Wonderful.
And so I want to say to the three ladies who I mentioned earlier, thanks, congratulations, and just feel happy to know that there are many of us who have bought into what you are proposing to do. But we must not lose sight of why we are here and what is the end product that would be expected of these three people and the leadership of this parliament. They expect us to come up with a model of mandate and structure and activities and reporting so that our whole task of oversight in this parliament would be strong, robust, and we can stand and match that. When you are drawing references later on, you will put Trinidad and Tobago up there, and that would be the yardstick for your references in the future presentation.
I would love that.
Yes. So, Madam Chairman, I would like to end at this point, but I have more to say.
Sure.
When
Thank
the
you
time
very much. Thank you for those very spirited remarks and contributions, and we appreciate the fact that you recognize the importance of this oval, as we call it, oval on oversight. And I also wanted to mention that yesterday morning there was a briefing with the media. So the week of activities has tried to touch on very many facets of the society. And the point that you made in terms of engaging civil society even more in the discussion is important. And I think the three leaders at the top have recognized that it is important to involve civil society as much as is possible. So I'm going to open the floor now for, yes, sir. Mr. Tyson.
Yes, good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. Kern Tyson, broadcast journalist. I've been a broadcaster for the last 14 years, and I, at times, take great pains and take fun at poking fun at politicians and parliamentarians. But reading Mr. Stapenhurst's report and also doing my own research, I can now appreciate the enormity of the task of parliamentarians. And I like the fact that you mentioned cricket, which of course is my favorite sport. And if our cricketers were part-time, how dire our situation would have been. Although it's already dire, or even worse, but it would have been, yes. They are part-time. Or let me say, even for our footballers who are on the cusp of maybe qualifying for Copa America, the challenges they would have faced if they were working part-time. And the real challenge we have in Trinidad and Tobago is that our parliamentarians are working part-time, and especially the government members of parliament, they are encumbered with being ministers. So how on earth are they going to do parliamentary oversight and really looking after the people when they have enormous tasks like, for example, the Minister of National Security, Minister of Health? So to balance that, to me, is virtually impossible. And one would definitely suffer, and most times it will be parliamentary oversight. So that certainly stood out for me. In addition, I am also very happy that this has been beamed live and civil society, they have a chance of being a part of it. Because as a member of the society, you feel sometimes alienated. You know, you feel as if the parliament is up there and we're down here. And it's hard for us to really meet and to engage them because you feel you're so far off. I always tell my listeners we need to require more out of our parliamentarians. But it's hard to do that if you don't know what they are supposed to do. So thanks again for being here, and I'll certainly chat later on.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Tyson. And just to let you know that we told Professor Stapenhurst that the cricket analogy is not a good one at this point in time. However, it is one that we enjoy talking about.
Definitely.
And thanks for your contribution. Are there, yes?
I wanted to follow Mr. Tyson.
Sure.
Dyson.
Tyson, yes, Ms. Bharath.
Primarily because what he's talking about in terms of public engagement.
Yes.
There are a number of new things that I've seen happen with the Parliament in the last couple of years in terms of oversight, and I think it's great. It allows the population to certainly hear more and find out more, especially when you have the question and answer sessions where the government or the Prime Minister is meant to answer questions. But my concern really is how are we going to begin to actively engage the public? Because I don't think that we should allow the Parliament alone to have oversight, right? Or to have Parliament and parliamentarians to have oversight. I think we can actually lighten the burden
Yes.
if we get the public, one, to be more educated
Yes.
about what goes on within both houses, and also to get them more actively engaged.
Yes.
And so that way you end up having a population that feels empowered. So I'm very happy to be here to talk about how we can start using new forms of technology and media to get people on board in terms of assisting with oversight, because I think the population has a vital and crucial role to play in the entire oversight process. We no longer want to be on the pavements in front
Yes.
of Tower D. We want
Yes.
to be inside.
Yeah. Thank you very much, yes. And that whole point of people understanding, the society understanding what Parliament does,
Yes.
and their roles and responsibilities to their parliamentarians to assist in the process is vital. And that's why this is going on, and this week of activities has occurred. Thank you. Dr. Robinson, I saw you had a hand up.
Yes, again, good morning, and thanks for the opportunity to be part of this group. I wanted to follow Mr. Tyson's comment about maybe to get some views in Trinidad in terms of MPs being full-time. And also the public education aspect, because I think as a public, whether in Trinidad or Barbados, OECS, where I'm more familiar, we tend to see Parliament in the plenary session, where people are having those robust debates, and that's our view of the work of Parliament. So I think from the point of the clerk and the speaker, and I think there's a lot of role to educate the public that there's actually a lot more that is involved in the work of Parliament. And maybe also have the media cover sessions other than the plenary. Because for the public, we see politicians as becoming parliamentarians and they debate in the plenary and they do constituency work. But the in-house work of the Parliament really is way beneath the surface. I think it's kind of underappreciated. But I'm curious to hear people's views because, you know, MPs being full-time employees, I think correlated with that, but how much are you going to pay them? And raising MPs' pay is always quite a controversial issue. So I'm interested to hear what other persons in the room, particularly in Trinidad, feel about that in terms of MPs being full-time, which is likely to maybe require some increased compensation if they are going to give up lucrative practices as doctors, lawyers, and other professionals.
Okay, are there any reactions? Mr. Vieira, you wanted to make a contribution? Ladies and gentlemen, remember we are watching Oval on Oversight. So your contribution, sir?
Thank you, Chair. Well, I read with great interest Professor Stapenhurst's findings and report. And I would like to focus on the puzzle he has identified. Because what he showed is that this Parliament, we have so much. We have all the laws, we have all the procedures, we have resources, and yet, why are we performing so poorly? That's a very deep and probing question. And I know you had put forward some suggestions about parliamentarians not working full-time, about the size of the parliament. These are all valid things. But I wanted to, I'll use a metaphor. In Tai Chi, you can do the form, but you're not really getting the best benefit if you don't have a certain intent and you don't put in a certain effort. And my experience sitting on the Joint Select Committee is that we are very good at the form, but sometimes I find that the effort is not really there. Members didn't seem to fully appreciate the importance of oversight. They didn't have the same level of enthusiasm as you would have in the debates. To me, committee meetings seemed more of a chore than really a privilege and a primary activity. Some members who showed up sometimes seem as though they're doing out of duty than really getting into the oversight aspects as well. And you're going through the motions, but you're not really preparing, you're not really engaging. So I know we have some great qualities as a people, you know, fun-loving, we're innovative, we're happy. But sometimes I think we are quick to settle on good enough. We're not really hungry for excellence. And I think that part of the problem is attitude and culture.
So this might be a good time for me to come in.
Yes, sir.
I think time is the least of our problems. I simply don't accept the recommendation or the finding that time is a major problem. It is exactly as, well, I like to be informal, it's exactly as Anthony has identified. It is lack of intent. And there are many reasons why that intent is lacking. And there are many cultural factors that will militate against parliamentary oversight succeeding. First of all, so really we are just here to discuss the status quo. We're not really challenging the status quo by trying to identify paying MPs more and all this business. The first and foremost thing that drives or undermines intent is the state enterprise system. Let me put that out on the table. And it undermines it for two reasons. First of all, it's much larger. It is so large that it will be impossible to have the requisite number of MPs unless you just pad the parliament to do the oversight. Secondly, the state enterprise system itself is set up in such a way to defy accountability, principally because many of the very important state enterprises are set up as private limited liability companies. And I brought along the UF report in case anybody's forgotten that Professor Uff examined that in the UF report. So I intend to circulate before the day is over a column that I wrote in 2002 called Interfering Intravenously. I'll be circulating it by hard copy and electronically to remind you that we are sitting here with this lovely face of oversight, but inside the veins that you can't see behind the political face is where all the money and possible corrupt acts run in a sector that is completely beyond the control of any oversight committee that we run in. It's too big and it's too hidden. So that's the first thing that militates against it. Secondly, assuming that we can cut down the subjects of oversight, and I'm not suggesting we cut it down just to make it small, I'm saying it militates against oversight. We have to be careful about this business of having enough MPs to sit on committees. I listened to the announcement of committees by Madam Speaker at the beginning of the Parliament. There are people sitting on 3, 4, 5, and in one case 6 committees. And that's not feasible. But then if you're going to increase the number of MPs just to carry out oversight, then you might as well hire, external accountants to do it. It doesn't make any sense hiring more MPs just to do this. On the question of MPs acting full-time, I just sound a note of caution that can't work for the independent senators. And so that has to be given some kind of consideration. People are quick to say that, all my life I've done all kinds of pro bono work in all kinds of ways. People are quick to say people don't. It's not about money. If you're in the course of a career, you can't stop your career in order to become a full-time senator in order to accept appointment as an independent senator. So we have to stick a pin there. But I completely reject the suggestion that time is the more likely reason we don't have successful parliamentary oversight. It is very definitely lack of political will and intent, and I've identified one of the reasons. That there are many others. We'll have to touch on campaign finance reform, because nobody is going to effectively oversee some event or some act or omission if that act or omission has been fueled or is an act or omission of somebody who is a financier behind the scenes. So to just talk about parliamentary oversight in the way that this report does defies the political culture and the socio-economic culture of Trinidad and Tobago. And if we are to have successful talks about this, we have to rip the mask off of all of these things. But I won't put any more cats among the pigeons for now.
All right. We are watching the Oval on Oversight, and we are discussing the role of oversight committees in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And we've had some very significant contributions already, talking about the whole political and socio-economic culture of Trinidad and Tobago, and the whole question of the perhaps lack of will and intent with regard to oversight, talking about the state enterprise system. We looked at the whole question of the time factor with regard to MPs and the reality in terms of senators accepting a full-time position as an MP, etc. So I know that there are a number of others who would wish to weigh in, and I'll allow for you to come back in.
I
Ms.
wanted
Bharath.
to add one more cat among the pigeons there along with what
Don't
Ms.
like pigeons?
I'm not against birds.
Yes.
I'm not against birds. I will join a bird society of your choosing. The public service and the role of the public service and the measures and checks and balances that the public service is supposed to be observing. We've listened to several debates since September 7th when we changed the government.
Yes.
Where you were hearing a lot about abuse of funds in the public service. And one of my questions was, so what is the role of the PermSec and the officers under the PermSec in checking and balancing all of this spending?
Yes.
But the public service has been systematically undermined by all the governments we have had, because they take all the big ticket items out of the public service and put it into the state enterprise sector. So yeah, the public servants can restrain individual abuse. Somebody who wants a bigger car than they're supposed to have, a Porsche or something, they can restrain that. But all the big ticket items have been systematically removed out of the... So to take a simple example, if you want to have a bidding process for a ferry to go to Tobago, why do you have to have a TIDCO, SIDCO, BIDCO, NEDCO, NIDCO to do all of that? And so that is something else we have to look at. So if parliamentary oversight is coming to a system that is already a way of doing business that is so systematically flawed, it's simply not going to work.
Yes. Mr. Sudama?
Well, can I say something as a former member of parliament?
Sure.
From my own perspective. First of all, I agree that the oversight function is really not taken all that seriously by MPs, because they feel it is not significant, it is not important, and there are very few consequences. In fact, as Professor Stapenhurst said, there are few reports. And even if there are reports which go to the parliament, there are no sanctions on the basis of what is discovered. So, yes, MPs have the tendency to deal more with representation, with talking in parliament, debating bills and so on. But the oversight function is given a secondary role. I'm wondering, I don't know, I'm wondering if some monetary incentive should be put in there so that the more parliamentary committees meeting you meet, you get a little extra for that, maybe. The second thing is we are looking at parliamentary oversight and parliamentary committees as a good in itself. It informs the public, it there's accountability and so on. But the issue of the relationship between parliamentary committees and corruption is one that it is not a direct relationship in my view, in the sense that if you want to reduce corruption, and corruption is not an abstraction, it's about people, the decisions they make, the systems they manage, and so on. If you want to reduce corruption, there are two things in my mind that are essential. The first is that there must be fear of exposure on the part of those who are making decisions. Fear of exposure, and secondly, threat of sanctions. Now, in the absence of these two things, it seems to me that the Parliamentary Accounts Committee, the Accounts Enterprises Committee, except they can put the fear into ministers and other people who make decisions, and later on threat of sanctions. It seems to me that the committee work by itself in terms of exposure is not going to suffice in dealing with the issue of corruption. The other issue is, of course, the time factor. I'm of the view that parliamentarians should be full-time and should be paid as such, because one of the most insecure occupations in the world is that of being a member of parliament. And therefore, their salaries, health benefits, for example, parliamentarians don't have. I understand they're going to this issue now. And particularly, plugging for myself, former parliamentarians have no health benefits to receive, having served in the parliament. And of course, there are pension benefits. Now, having given them all these things, there are still those who might be tempted. The issue of temptation.
Yes.
I think it's Oscar Wilde who said that he can resist everything except temptation. And how do you get them to resist?
Yes.
Those who, are making all these decisions. So I think also is the spreading parliamentarian time thin. I mean, how could a parliamentary representative serve on 4 or 5 committees? And secondly, for these parliamentary accounts committees to be effective, there ought to be preparedness. How well are parliamentarians prepared? I mean, what are the support services? Do they have the benefit of, financial services, advice, financial analysis, accounting, administrative procedures, management competence, and so on? Advice in these areas so that they are able to ask significant and probing questions at the parliamentary committee level. And then they are able to get the responses on which they will then make a report as to the soundness of those responses. I mean, I've sat in committees where people say, well, look, the person who is responsible for this is no longer around. So there is no response.
Yes.
And secondly, that, the response would come some other time, which never does. Never does, right? So that there's this element of lack of seriousness on those who are made to respond.
Yes.
Another final point I want to make is this issue about, which I believe is not the best or false dichotomy between policy and administration. And therefore, the people you are questioning are the administrators, the permanent secretaries, and whoever. But the person who are responsible for policy, which overlaps administration, there are some ministers who have a hands-on approach to their ministries, and get deeply involved in administration. My own view is that these committees, I think the Parliament should be enlarged. The committees should not have ministers on them. And ministers should be accountable to the committee. They should appear before a committee and be able to defend their policy decisions, which has financial implications. And therefore, if you go that route, you will, in my view, have a more meaningful parliamentary oversight, parliamentary accounts process.
Thank you.
Which would then make people think, take the parliament on perhaps a little more seriously than they do currently.
Thank you for your contribution, Mr. Sudama.
May I take up two things on that? Trevor's absolutely right about fear of exposure. But as long as you have a state enterprise system which is not properly accountable and is set up without statutory authorities, the UF Commission recommended that all these enterprises should be made statutory authorities. You can't make a minister accountable because he says the chairman and the board did it. So I'm sorry to keep harping on this point, but it's absolutely fundamental. So whether you shrink the state enterprise system as a matter of socio-economic policy, you certainly first have to make them legally and properly accountable. And all of this was gone into in the UF Commission. I went there as a private citizen and gave evidence about this. And the second, so many times there's no fear of the exposure of the politician because the board of the state enterprise, they become the fall guys and fall girls.
Yes.
And so it is fundamental that we look at this, because if all of the big money is running intravenously through the system, you can't expose anybody of consequence.
But I just want to make a point that ministers are in some respects accountable because they have the authority to give general or specific direction,
Not to private
policy
limited
direction
liability companies.
to state enterprises.
Yes.
Because the state enterprise does not function in a vacuum. It functions under a government policy.
But
Okay,
the whole
Dr.
point
Ryan.
about Professor Uff's recommendation was precisely that in the case of statutory authorities, there's legislative provision for the giving of general and specific directions. But in the case of Udicot, which provoked that whole commission, the board took the view that they had fiduciary duties under the company law and they were not obliged to follow what the minister said. And Uff came to the conclusion that it was a very difficult point to say that a minister could give a limited liability company a direction. The best a minister could do would be to change the board. So I think there's really a big issue there. I mean, I'm sorry to keep harping on this, but I've been trying to get this point across for over a decade.
Okay. Dr. Ryan, you wanted to have an opportunity to make a contribution.
I just wanted to make a brief intervention. When I saw who was going to be introducing the various subjects that we will deal with today, I recognized the professor who is from Canada. And I went over to him immediately because I hoped that he would be able to answer some questions that I had. I used to look at this issue 10, 15, 20 years ago. And when I saw him, I said, he could tell me what has succeeded and what has failed. How does one define failure? And how the Canadians, if they have been able to deal with some of these knotty problems and help us, because we can read all the books, we could go to the internet and read all the books, but unless we have a sense of what works and what does not work, how do we define failure, how do we define achievement, we'll be getting nowhere. So I was hoping that before the end of the morning or whenever we break, that he would be able to bring some light to bear on some of these issues and have me going home thinking that I had made my morning worthwhile. Thank you very much.
Perhaps that is a good point for me to jump in.
Okay.
And I've heard so many good things this morning, but let me just pick up on a couple. One that I won't pick up on is the issue of state-owned enterprises. I have strong personal views, but those may not be relevant here. And in any case, I'm not familiar with the situation in Trinidad and Tobago. But I would say that, for example, in Canada, we have crown corporations, and they are accountable to Parliament. Other countries have privatized their state-owned enterprises. So you have different options, and that's for you to debate and consider. I think it's important to remember that, and to build on what Trevor had said, the objective of parliamentary oversight isn't to reduce corruption. It's to improve the efficiency, the effectiveness, and the economy of public spending. In other words, taxpayers' money.
Yes.
And it so happens that in doing that, in promoting economy, efficiency, and effectiveness, corruption is reduced. I mean, the analysis globally shows that when you have effective oversight, you have more efficient, more effective, more economical governments, and you have lower corruption. And I think you're quite right. The two things that can reduce corruption is exposure, transparency, and sanctions or accountability. And these are two factors that very strongly relate to Parliament's activities and parliamentary oversight. An active oversight committee is shown around the world. An active oversight committee with reports laid in Parliament, of rigorous analysis, hard questioning by witnesses, taking the reports of an independent Auditor General, using that as a starting point for analysis and debate, allowing the members of the committee to do their work without undue partisan influence. And I'm not naive here. I'm not so naive as to suggest as soon as members go into committee, they forget their party allegiance. But they must be given the room to do oversight. Their reports are laid in Parliament and debated. Their recommendations, where appropriate, are accepted by government, but not just accepted, implemented by government, and that Parliament and MPs follow up to make sure that the recommendations that government says it will implement are implemented. So I think that puts this into that kind of broader context. Oversight of a committee takes place in this broader context. And for citizen engagement, I think citizen engagement and understanding is critical. And it's critical at a number of levels. And as you implied, no member of Parliament is elected because they're good on a parliamentary oversight committee. First of all, their work in the committee isn't known, and even if it is known, most of the public don't understand what a parliament does, what a parliamentary oversight committee does. And I think the point that I made earlier this week is important to remember. That, and I don't want to simplify this, but an effective oversight by parliamentary committees reduces corruption. That's not their objective, but globally, looking at 100-odd countries, that's the fact. And effective control of corruption leads to higher standards of living. And I think that then engages all of us, those of us who are not passionate about parliamentary oversight, and might say that, oh, corruption is inevitable. But if corruption is lowered and we realize that that means there's more money in our pockets because economic growth is stronger, then I think we can engage citizens.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sir.
Thanks.
Mr. Vieira.
But one of the best things I think coming out of this panel discussion and the activities of the week has been really to highlight the importance of oversight. I don't think the public has really appreciated that this is one of the core features of a good democracy, right? It's an important check and balance. And for myself, I often felt that the work being done in the Joint Select Committee was as important, if not more important, than what was being said in the debates. Because quite frankly, the public is quite jaded with all the fine speeches and talks and going nowhere fast. You know, people are getting cynical. You're hearing about all of this that has happened and all of that has happened, and yet nobody's being held to account. But yet when you are doing effective oversight, the public, because we televise it, they're seeing it, they're hearing it, you're building public trust. So I think oversight is a real means towards preventing, towards detecting abuse, arbitrary behavior, unconstitutional conduct on the part of government and public agencies. Now, so it's important. But then we go into it in a kind of an amateur fashion. Nobody's trained. When I sat on the committees, I was frustrated at the amount of time, a disproportionate amount of time being spent on reading minutes and correcting typos and not really drilling down into the substance of the thing. We don't really use our committees as effectively and as efficiently as we should. There is power for committees to use experts to subpoena and get supports, like lawyers and forensic accountants. Because when you're presented with all of these accounts, you can gloss over it. You really need to have an experienced and learned eye to say, look, these are the questions that you need to be asking. Now, having said that, I want to flag the support of the Parliament staff is sterling. It is fantastic. I don't think the public really appreciates the amount of work that is done behind the scenes and what they do for parliamentarians in terms of helping you with questions, identifying topics. But they themselves, they don't have the numbers. So when you have the same staff trying to write reports for several committees all at once, bunching up, that's a pressure. But I think we really need to take this oversight thing more seriously, and we need to treat it more professionally.
But you have to develop a backbench tradition. That's another thing we're lacking. I mean, I'm sorry if I spoke out.
No, that's all right. I saw that Mr. Tyson had his hand up.
No, I didn't catch his eye.
Yes. No, did he catch yours? Yes.
No, did I catch? No, I'm just asking a question here. Persons entering to Parliament, especially the House of Representatives, are they cognizant of the fact, or do they understand the enormity of their task? Because I get the impression that they use it maybe as a ticket to maybe becoming a minister. You get in there to maybe toe the party line, and I understand that. But do you think that they are acutely aware of the task of not just representing but oversight?
Good question.
But we don't have a backbench tradition.
Yes.
Once you sign up to fight elections for a particular party,
Yes.
or you accept appointment as a senator, you are expected to agree with the government on everything, or the opposition on everything. We have to develop a backbench tradition. Long before we think about whether the time is available, whether they should be full-time, there are certain things that we lack in the political culture. There is no backbench tradition. And if somebody who is not a minister was bold enough to ask a hostile question.
That's the end of it.
Exactly, it's the end of him. In the case of the Senate, his appointment would be reviewed.
The fact is there are very few backbenchers.
Exactly.
That's the point, yes, in terms of the numbers. Yes.
Expand the Parliament.
And first thing that you have to do is, people beg to become ministers because ministers, I believe, get more paid than the ordinary MP. So those are the things we have. Otherwise, we just going and preserving the status quo and borrowing, what is this, international best practice. We have some very peculiar problems in a small, well, until recently rich country, which produces particular problems. And we don't have a backbench tradition because, as Trevor points out, sometimes everybody's a minister, and who is not a minister, with great respect to the presiding officers, gets a deputy so that they can get more money. So those are the things we have to start looking at first before we even think about enlarging the Parliament. And Kern is absolutely right. Nobody who offers themselves a political office knows what their real duties are.
Mr. Tyson, you wanted to respond to that or to make a further point?
No.
All right, Dr. McKenzie.
Yes. Madam Chairman.
Yes, ma'am.
Many people who look at because the Parliament broadcasts the Public Accounts Committee meetings and these meetings. People who look at the television or listen to these broadcasts do not interpret what is happening as an oversight work. They just see it, some people see it as an inquisition of the whether it's a tea and tech report or whatever report that comes, and the chairman is this and the chairman is like the people who come before it. They have the parliamentary, administrative people waiting in the wings to advise them. If they ask you this question, say that. If let me interpret this for you, this is reason why we did that. They don't see it as if this is a parliamentary committee trying to inquire into something, trying to understand a report that would have been presented to the parliament.
Why do you think that is so? Why
because they don't know, and there's no public education to say.
Which is the point.
Just as you did this morning, you came on and you said, look, I am so and so. We are here for this, that, and the other. So people understand, because that is how I started off my thing when I was preparing for this. Why are we here?
Correct.
And I expect, so if somewhere along the line, the chairman or whoever it is, or preferably the parliamentary clerk or whoever is there as a non-partisan person, because you are government people, opposition people. So we vying against each other. And then I have heard people who listen to it. You hear the news today? You hear where the chairman asks the man the question, they thief the money, they can't answer. When he asks the this and that, he say, ask the permanent secretary. What the permanent secretary have to do for that? Them making the policy, them say. They do not understand the role of a committee, whether it's a joint select committee, a public accounts committee, public accounts enterprise committee, nothing. They just see it as, all you coming in front of me today. I hope all you're ready for me. I'm ready for all you. We have to stop that, and therefore, it boils down to the fact that even the members of the committee feel they're going to
an inquiry. Yes.
An inquisition.
Yes.
Get all my questions right up.
Yes.
We don't want to do nothing but let us see how this is what has been pinpointed by the Auditor General. We are doing this wrong. We need to buck up on this. You all met 6 months ago. We met. Where the report?
Yes.
No report, no minutes, no nothing. Nobody reporting to anybody. The Parliament sent up Joint Select Committee. Get up. Madam President, I'd like to report that committee met 5 times for this, that.
Yes,
no report, you're debating nothing, you're saying nothing.
Yes.
Wasting time.
Therefore, there are no sanctions.
Finally, Madam
Yes.
Chairman, I would like to see, listening to all of us, reading from what Professor wrote, and all the suggestions from everyone who would have spoken today and from what you would have gathered during the week, we need a cocktail.
Yes, ma'am.
We need a cocktail. You know, when the AIDS thing came out, they tried one medicine. It didn't work. They said, add another thing. They said, cross out that and put more of this and less of this. We need a cocktail. So we're going to take everybody's suggestion, comment, remark, criticism, challenge, whatever it is. And we have someone or a group that will sit down and say, this is the model we will come up with. A cocktail, and when I say a cocktail, is a little bit of this, cross out that, put more of this. Because probably what we have, and from what you said, Professor, we need more reports.
Yes.
And probably less cross-talk and questioning and go and find this and bring this report next week.
Yes.
So we need more reports.
Yes.
We need more people, according to Mr. Sudama.
Yes.
We need more exposure. We need more investigative journalism. We need more will, more political will, that the politician must be saying, that is what we want to do. We want to improve this. We cannot be 85 out of 175 in the corruption index next year.
Well said.
And Dr. McKenzie, I just want to say, we have to, amen.
Yeah.
Amen. Yes.
We need to have clear goals and clear ways to measure how we get into those goals. Huh? We can't just say we need more of this. Very clear goals and clear ways to measure.
I'm sure they would not find anyone to sit on with the possible exception of the independent senators, as a matter of our political culture, you will not find anyone to sit on a committee that will criticize their own side or look into anything that involves a financier in the absence of campaign finance reform. So if you're going to look at parliamentary oversight without tackling these underlying issues, then all we are here to do is to make the status quo look more pretty. I'm very, very strong on that.
Yeah, Mr. Vieira and then Mr. Sudama.
Picking up on Dr. McKenzie's point, I think the kind of questioning that takes place is also important. When I see questions being asked, they tend to be either in the form of a political statement or a disempowering question. They're not genuine requests for information. And I think we could do better. Now, the reports, that's a very, very important thing. I find the reports tend to be written they've changed now, but they used to be written in a very long-winded, old-fashioned, not a user-friendly way at all. So they were heavy and cumbersome. I like short, pithy reports that cut to the chase with an executive summary and that say something. And then we put in these reports and then they're forgotten forevermore.
What happened?
Now, in India, I believe there was a directive by the speaker that when you have filed a report and there are recommendations in it, the relevant minister has to come back to Parliament every 6 months and explain the status of the recommendations. So we need to put in some kind of measures that less talk and more action.
All right. Mr. Sudama, would you mind holding your point? And when we resume, I will give you the floor first. You're watching Oval on Oversight, and we're discussing the role of oversight committees in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And what we want to do at this point is take a 10-minute break, and I hope that you will rejoin the discussion in 10 minutes. Please don't go away. Thank you.
Follow the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago on Twitter. Our call sign is @TTParliament. This is the Parliament Channel and Parliament Radio 105.5 FM. Parliamentary updates. The third week of training workshops for the 13th National Youth Parliamentary Debate began on Monday, September 14th, 2015. The facilitator of this week's workshops was Ms. Diana Mahabir-Wyatt, a former independent senator who served continuously in the Parliament from 1991 to 2000. Ms. Mahabir-Wyatt introduced the students to the conceptual processes involved in a debate. She provided the students with insight into the importance of debates and allowed the students to collaborate with their peers to discuss why debates are held, especially in Parliament. Students were given advice on planning and preparing for a debate, building content, and pointers on delivering their presentations. Ms. Mahabir-Wyatt also briefed the students on the application of the standing orders of the Parliament as it applies to the conduct of debates. The standing orders are the written rules which govern the proceedings in the House of Representatives and the Senate. Following the workshops, a few students were approached by the Parliament Channel 11 to discuss their experiences in this week's workshops and throughout the various preparations in the lead-up to the debate day.
Today we did the debate theory, so we were split up into groups and we had to talk about why we think a debate is important in Parliament, and our teacher really explained to us the whole proceedings. She went through how our body language can really affect others, and I think that's definitely important in what we're about to do.
What I learned today is about debating and debating methods, how you are supposed to debate your key points in debating, how you summarize your notes, how you develop your points, and how you bring about points, and how finally you reach towards a goal, whether you find things to improve your point or disregard your point altogether?
So one of the things Ms. Mahavir was talking about, she was in Senate, and there was the senator, it was the Prime Minister of England, who was using false statistics to get his point across the room. So he basically made up a piece of information to try and show and persuade his audience that X is equal to Y, whatever. But in reality, when they came and spoke to him after, they found out, it was untrue, and she was saying, never do that, because obviously you can't make up false information. There'll be serious consequences. The good things, well, definitely how people projected their voice, the way they stood, the way they looked at somebody in their eyes, definitely that got them, got the ball rolling and the confidence and so on.
So far, well, from what I've experienced, it has been really great. Everyone here, students as well as the clerks at the Parliament, are all really nice. Even the persons who were in charge of the seminars that we have been to, they were all really influential as well as educational, and they were so interactive that they kept everyone in sync with everything that they were doing. It was such a worthwhile experience, and I really hope that other people would look at it as that and try to take part in it.
All of the training workshops scheduled have been designed to give the students a holistic understanding and appreciation of the skills required as they prepare to make their debut as youth parliamentarians. Stay tuned to the Parliament channel and Radio 105.5 FM for continued updates and insight into the students' journey to the 13th National Youth Parliament, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter.
Parliamentary updates.
Just the mention of the name, the Red House, and the image of the magnificent red building located within the capital city of Port of Spain comes to mind. It covers an entire block from Hart Street to Knox Street and sits perfectly between Abercrombie and St. Vincent Streets. The Red House is the seat of this country's democracy and was once used to host parliamentary proceedings. Its history dates back to the 1800s, when the first building was constructed and painted red to celebrate the Diamond Jubilee of Queen Victoria. As a result of its color, citizens coined the phrase the Red House to describe the building, a label that has lasted to this day. Following the water riots in 1903, which resulted in the first building being gutted by fire, the Red House was rebuilt and opened to the public in 1907. Since then, the building has hosted a variety of government functions and many historic events, particularly the official ceremony that marked this country's first day of independence on August 31st, 1962. Over the years, the structure of the Red House weakened and restorative works commenced at the site. Prior to this, however, it became necessary to excavate several inspection units at various locations throughout the Red House. This was done in order to provide for structural reinforcement inspection works for the seismic retrofitting of the building. In March 2013, during excavation works, human skeletal and biological remains, bone fragments, mollusks, and pre-colonial cultural material were found in the basement of the Red House. Archaeologists were brought in to conduct excavation and post-excavation analyses at the site. The late Mr. Peter Harris led the archaeological team during the early stages of the excavation process. However, due to his demise, Dr. Basil Reed, senior lecturer in archaeology at the University of the West Indies, was brought on board to lead the archaeological team and continue excavation works on July 1, 2013. During the removal exercise, 6 complete skeletons, 36 incomplete skeletons, 3 sets of long bones, and 1 skull in a pot were discovered. Several coins were also unearthed, of which the most valuable is a $1 US gold luster coin. Samples of the unearthed material were sent abroad for DNA testing and radiocarbon dating in order to determine the ethnicity, gender, and age of the bones. 2 particular samples of shells belonging to the group of pre-colonial material discovered at the Red House were sent abroad to be dated. Tests reveal they were from the periods 5510 to 5330 BC and 4330 to 4130 BC. Over 13,000 individual fragments of European ceramics were discovered, as well as adornos and colonial period ceramics. Artifacts and various Amerindian pottery were discovered throughout the Red House basement, along with shells and fragments of animal bones belonging to 8 species of animals. Numerous stone artifacts and pottery found buried with at least 9 of the skeletons suggest that they were directly linked to the interment process. It is also believed that landfill from the Laventil quarry was used to fill the area before the first building was constructed. To date, approximately 2,260 cubic meters of soil has been excavated since work began at the site in July 2013. Although excavation works were completed in September 2014, all skeletal testing should be completed by mid-January 2015. An agreement signed by the Office of the Parliament and the University of Central Florida has facilitated a visit by Dr. John Schultz, a forensic anthropologist, and his assistant, who will examine and conduct tests on the skeletons and bones during that period. Dialogue has been ongoing between the Red House Historical Cultural Heritage Team, a cabinet-appointed committee, and representatives of the 3 First Peoples groups to determine the ideal location to house the cultural remains. The committee has agreed in principle that all the remains of the First Peoples should be interred on the grounds of the Red House with an appropriate sign indicating the significance of the area. In the interim, the First Peoples have been allowed to hold religious ceremonies on the Red House grounds. The archaeological team will continue work beyond the retrieval phase for the purpose of completing the processing and collating of the finds. An academic publication detailing the restorative and excavation works will be compiled and published, and all information gathered will be forwarded to the Archaeological Subcommittee of the National Trust of Trinidad and Tobago. The Red House is and continues to be an iconic building situated within the nation's capital. These recent findings can only add to the remarkable significance of the building and may answer questions about our country's former inhabitants who called our island their home centuries ago.
Follow the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago on Twitter. Our call sign is @TTParliament. Parliament Outreach.
What I learned basically the key roles of media and civil society and what they play as a support of democracy.
Well, I learned some new things, some I already knew, such as the legislature and the committee that takes action based on the conduct of parliament members. I learned about that.
I learned that as a citizen of this country, I do have a role to play. When I am able to vote, I have the opportunity to ensure that democracy reigns in our country, and that mass media also ensures that the public opinion is viewed and that everybody has a chance to say what they need to.
Parliament Outreach. Check our website for showtimes, ttparliament.org.
You're viewing the Parliament Channel 11, also broadcasting on 105.5 FM.
This is the Parliament Channel and Parliament Radio 105.5 FM. This is the Parliament Channel and Parliament Radio 105.5 FM.
We had advanced only a few yards when a murderous fire was opened on us, and with the exception of a sergeant, a private and myself, all were wiped out. Stuart Scott.
World War I was one of those cataclysmic events in world history which shook everything up. It had enormous effects all over the world. Millions of young men on both sides of the conflict actually welcomed the war as a way of proving their manhood, proving that they were, in fact, fully fledged masculine men who could take on the glories and the dangers and the dramas of war.
People wanted to fight. We didn't have to. They never conscripted a single Trinidadian. They were all volunteers, everyone.
Follow the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago on Twitter. Our call sign is @TTParliament.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are watching Oval on Oversight, and we are discussing how we can effectively move towards a model for oversight for the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And we had a very interesting discussion before our break, so welcome back. And just to remind you who our panelists are, to my left is the Speaker of the House. Next to her is Mr. Selwyn Ryan. Then we have Mr. Kern Tyson. We have Jackie Sampson Miguel, Mr. Vieira, Ms. Bharath, and joining us is Dr. Winford James.
It's actually Win.
Sorry, Winford. Winford James.
Win, yes.
Right, political analyst. Next to him is Mr. Sudama, who was here with us earlier. Then we have Sunity Rampersad. Maharaj, I'm sorry. Yes, I can't see this at such a distance. I'm sorry, Columnist. Justin Robinson from Cave Hill. And then we have Dr. Sheila Rampersad, who is also a columnist. We have Professor Stapenhurst, who's been with us for the week, Dr. McKenzie, Mr. Martin Daly, and Madam President, I didn't really mean to call you last, recognizing protocol, so please accept my apology in that regard, Ms. Christine Kangaloo. Just before we broke, Mr. Sudama, you had a point that you wished to raise, I think in context of the discussion that had been going on previously.
Yes.
So I'll give you an opportunity, and then I will ask, if you don't mind, Ms. Maharaj, Dr. Rampersad, and yes, Mr. James to join.
That's a brief point. And I think this has to do with the political culture. And that is the public there seems to think that an administration or government needs to account only at election time. So therefore, if you don't like what they did over the last 5 years, you vote them out. They don't see the whole issue of accountability as an ongoing process. That from the time you elect them, they're supposed to be accountable for every action and account periodically and so on. And therefore, they should insist on the mechanisms which would enforce that level of continuous accountability. And unless that demand comes from the public, you're not going to have that accountability effective. Because then politicians respond to what they perceive people want. And if they feel that you want continuous accountability and that is not being provided, they might take that as one element in their decision when you go back for your re-election. But if they feel that, as far as they're concerned, that's not important, and that they will complain, and then when the time comes, they will then decide what they do about your election or re-election. So what I'm arguing is that reinforcing the point made by Anthony, that a greater level of public education is required about the continuity of accountability and the mechanisms that need to be put in place and the monitoring aspect of it and all that.
All right, thank you. Are any of our new panelists interested in having a perspective at this point in time, please?
Well, I think Mr. Sudama has a point. And it brings me back to the report, which is I thought that Professor Stapenhurst took quite a leap in raising the joint possibilities of lack of political will and lack of time, and concluding it must be time because MPs are part-time, when I wish we need to explore the issue of political will. Accountability at the parliamentary oversight level is the top of a chain of accountability throughout the system. And I think what we need to examine is that issue of accountability in the society. Down to individual accountability, of course, but down to the lowest possible level in the system of governance. And I think if we see accountability from the ground up, when you're building accountability, you're building it through into the system. So when you get at the top, that culture is there. And people understand when Parliament talks, when the reports come out, because they have been practicing it in their small units. And the issue becomes, it's culture. It is culture, and how, therefore, do we plumb that issue of the culture that underpins political behavior? The problem, if we just jump straight, without exploring that, we jump straight to the issue of fixing part-time, is that we are going to chase it with money and investment of hope and energy, and then find it makes no difference. Because then our MPs will be full-time dedicated to whatever it is the interest that is even from them. You know, they may be totally innocent of it, but they are part of and I think Martin raised the point about the accountability within the state enterprise sector, that it doesn't get to you. Whatever has happened before it gets to you, and it is hidden. And the people are creating paper trails after the fact, and you have all the paper that they present to you and so on. So I think we need to explore, and this is part of what the work of the University of the West Indies, I mean, all the work that is going on with Salises and so on, exploring the culture of the place and how it is reflected in our institutions, Parliament being one of them.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sir?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Dr. James?
Let me start off by observing that there is an assumption underneath all the talk we have heard so far, that if the parliamentary oversight system works, we would be in a better place. Trinidad and Tobago would be in a better place. How do we know? It has been working, and Professor Stapenhurst has praised it, comparatively speaking. But what are the results? So we are in a better place than some people. Or what is that doing for us as a country? Where is the research that is supposed to take place vis-a-vis the work of parliamentary oversight committees? Where is that research? The university comes in there, I'm sure. But nobody has the benefit of any research on such a matter. So that's the first observation I need to make. I need to say as well that it's a misnomer to be talking about parliamentary oversight. Parliament is overseeing itself. But all the reports, whenever they do come, that go before the Parliament have to be resolved by the larger body. And the larger body is structured in a particular way, where the Prime Minister is king. The The Prime Minister is king of the cabinet.
Or queen.
Queen. Or queen. The Prime Minister is king of the Parliament. Our Constitution ensures that the government has a majority in both the cabinet and the government and the Parliament. And we know from the history that there is consensual support from the people who belong to the ruling party. We know that. It also happens in the opposition. Sometimes, Martin, there's some maverick backbencher who might do something. or minister. You know. Yes. Especially, yes, exactly. And coming towards new elections as well, we find that kind of behavior. But seriously, if you have the cabinet in control of the Parliament, then what you're saying really is that you can't have the kind of change that you want, because really the problem is how you constrain the executive. That's the essential problem. All executives, regardless of what, the Kamala Persad executive and now the Rowley executive, how do you constrain the executive? Because that's where you're going to handle the corruption. I accept that corruption is going to be reduced as a matter of course if you have better governance, if you have better management of what goes on in Parliament.
Public spending.
Yes, that is going to happen as a matter of course, but that's not the issue. The issue for me is how do you constrain executives, because executives need to be controlled because they can easily become laws unto themselves. Yes? And it seems to me, and it relates to the talk about public education and the involvement of the people after the vote. Seems to me that we have to fix this problem at the level of the Senate. It's at the Senate you have to fix it. The Senate has to be so structured as to involve different publics, different independent publics. And let me just bring matters to a head by referring to an event that has recently occurred in our public space, the firing of the governor of the central bank and the appointment of a new governor. Now, how was that done? It was done by the king. The Parliament did not review that. There was no Senate to say, Dr. Hilaire, you have to come before us and we've got to ask you some questions. We've got to test your suitability for this job. The same thing with the firing of Jawala Rambaran. He should have been, I personally feel he should be fired, but not the way in which he was. Do you understand what I'm saying? Not the way in which he was. What we had there was the king flexing his muscles, as we have had kings in the past doing so. Bring Mr. Rambaran before a Senate composed in such a way that the government does not have the edge. Because we really badly need to so compose our structures that government doesn't have an automatic pass for all its decisions. Otherwise, you can't have any good democracy occurring. And this is why I'm saying all this business about parliamentary oversight has to take into account that the way our system is structured, the king is too strong because he has automaticity of success for his actions. I mean, decision-wise. And so we need to focus on how we reconstitute the Senate to so represent the various publics out there who do not have a voice after the vote. Trevor was saying, well, that's a matter of culture. But it's more than culture.
Who will select the Senate?
Well, this is the point. We have to now sit down and determine, because it's constitutional reform we are talking about. You see, so all of us have to be involved in that process. But we are not there yet, Trevor. We are not there yet when we say, look, if we are not getting the effects of parliamentary oversight that we intend, we are not having it, and we have known that for a long time. How do we fix it? Which means that all kinds of voices have to contend and force the executive at that point in time to take action. The public has to bring pressure on the king at the particular time that those ideas are raging.
But Winford, we've been there with many attempts at constitutional reform, which we accept we need, but the very king is appointing the reform, the commission.
Yeah, but
right?
we can affect that process.
So we ultimately come down to the individual citizen.
Yes.
It is the electorate and
Arrange-
the oversight function.
Arranged in their publics.
Yes.
But there's another important point that you raised there, you know, Winford. We keep talking about the public and so on, but this is not a society in which dissent is valued. You're punished for dissent.
Yes.
That's another cultural thing that we have to contend with. And I don't think Trevor mind my saying this. He was part of a very unique event in our parliament, which is that his dissent, whether he was right on the issue, wrong on the issue, had a certain effect and was supposedly in the best Westminster traditions.
Yes.
And I'm raising this to say, everything that is written about Trevor Sudama is written from the point of view of betrayal, and he did the wrong thing. Nobody has ever written positively. But wait a minute, this is a man who was part of a group of 3 persons who put his political career on the line.
That's
We should applaud him.
Yeah.
But the beauty queen will get the honor before a dissenter, of which Trevor Sudama is an example. So another thing you have to throw in the mix is dissent. Ask me how dissent is hard in this society.
Those are risks. Those are democratic risks. Yeah.
Yes.
And this is across administrations.
Yes, that's what's true.
Across administrations.
Yeah.
And it
Dissent is not tolerated.
And it feeds into what Sunity is saying there about culture and responsibility. There's a sense in which the society is unresponsible as opposed to irresponsible. And it's unresponsible because there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of insecurity about speaking up and speaking out.
Well, let's talk about the fear a little bit. Why do you think people have this high level of fear? It's because the state employs them. And too many people are employed by the state, and therefore they depend on the state for their livelihood, and they're afraid of being fired. You take Tobago, for example. Over 70% of the employees of the Tobago House of Assembly, of the public, the workers in the island, are employed by the House of Assembly.
But, okay.
Therefore, the fear must be there, especially now.
But Dr. James, you're making it sound as if it's a state sometimes that will be punitive, and oftentimes it's not necessarily the state in that higher sense.
An economy that is structured in such a way that the state employs most of the people, you are going to have that level of fear that you're talking about.
Let me give you a for example. Let's say you're running a department and I work in that department, and you are in favor of whoever is in the government at that point in time. And I have views that are anti that. When time comes for my review, you may easily decide that you're going to give me a negative review because you have a problem with my personal views. And that's not necessarily the state directly coming down on me. That might be personal.
Oh, that might be about it, but that's not the point.
That is the fact that power is not accountable. Anywhere power resides, it is not accountable.
Correct.
But don't
and you have no recourse.
Correct.
Don't miss the general point.
No, I'm not missing the general point.
If you have an economy that is mostly dominated by the state, the level of fear is going to be greater than if it were otherwise.
Okay.
And that is why you need to expand the economy, the private sector, in ways that it is not at this time expanded.
Okay.
There's an economic argument, economic influence on the democracy that we are trying to get here. And I'm making the point that if you want to reduce fear, you've got to expand the private sector.
Provided the private sector is not dependent on the state.
On the state. You're watching the Oval on Oversight, and we're discussing the role of oversight committees in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Rampersad, I think you wanted to weigh in on this very interesting discussion. Yes, so let's give her the floor, please.
I mean, I think any discussion about where the country is at and where we need to be will ultimately revolve around some very, very large issues about change of culture, constitutional reform, and those are some fundamental things. While we wait for those things to happen, there is a time in between, and in that time in between we need to sort of work somewhat and massage what we have to try to get something going. And So I begin with a point that I think is will not match the gravitas, I think, of some of the contributions here. But if you bear with me for 30 seconds, it'll get there. Access to the Parliament as an institution, as a structure, as a place, as a physical place where we are sitting now, is problematic.
Yes.
It is problematic for journalists who have a key role in oversight and accountability. And if it is problematic for journalists, I can assume, therefore, extrapolate from that, that it is almost impossible for ordinary members, as it were, to use that ill term, ordinary people, right? Just regular citizens. The Parliament is located in Port of Spain, where people avoid coming. Port of Spain is a place people don't like to come. They don't want to come. And it is a task when they do have to. But somebody from Rancho Camado, from Thick Village, who has to come to Port of Spain to conduct business on a day when Parliament happens to be in session, either the Senate or a committee or the lower house, should have access in between tasks in Port of Spain. Let me go and sit down in Parliament and hear what they're talking about. Or somebody who has a particular interest in an issue that is before the Parliament in whatever system, whatever structure, organ of the Parliament, should be able to feel comfortable and in some way accommodated to witness what is happening. And that is a fundamental and a basic problem with the unfriendliness of what we refer to as the Parliament, and that we often stand on the floor and refer to as the People's Parliament. It is not the People's Parliament. People don't feel that it is their Parliament. And one of the reasons that people do not feel that is because they cannot access the Parliament as easily as they should be able to access it. There is a level of arbitrariness downstairs about who enters and who doesn't enter, what measurement your hemline is, what is the quality of your footwear, how your hair looks, whether you walk into the Parliament sucking on a dinner mint, and I'm referring to these things not out of the air, these are real examples that I'm giving you, right? So if these are the issues, I have raised it in the past with the Clerk of the House, and I know that Jackie is very interested in trying to resolve some of these things. But if these are the issues, then how can people at a very fundamental level feel connected to this thing that we call an institution if they do not feel accommodated in its physical structure, right? So I think that takes me to another point about whether there is anything written anywhere that says all committee meetings of Parliament must happen in this building. And whether there is any possibility of committees from time to time convening and meeting with all your security arrangements and all the things that are necessary outside of the Parliament building and outside of Port of Spain, and in areas where people can have access to what is going on. And it's a simple matter, and it leads me to the point that for all of the oversight mechanisms we have that are not working, because personalities populate these systems, these institutions, and the personalities have difficulty getting these things to work, and sometimes the personalities have difficulties working themselves. The personalities do not work. So that one of the ways in which any system can be held accountable, and an easy, simple, basic way, is when that system faces the people whom it affects, face to face, right? So I want somebody face to face to stand in front of me and have a conversation with me one-on-one, not through the Parliament channel, and not through the floor of the Parliament, that tells me, how is it that we have expended tens of millions of dollars on what was originally a Women's Affairs Ministry that has become a Gender Affairs Ministry without any policy guiding that ministry? There's no policy that guides the gender ministry. A lot of our expenditure goes there, but there is no policy guideline for the ministry because that is tied up in a politicized and a sensationalized issue that now has taken on a sort of whole identity of its own, labeled the gender policy. But there has never been a committee of Parliament that has ever sat in the last decade in an issue that has been contentious, controversial, that on which we expend taxpayers' money. And there has never been a committee of Parliament that sits and examines why is this what it is and how can we resolve it. Which takes me to the second and the last point that I would like to make, which is what triggers committee processes. Now, I am an avid viewer of Parliament committee meetings, and it's not because I have a lot of time on my hands, right? And I wonder sometimes what triggers the various committees, because there are issues that affect people in this country, affect them over long periods of time, that are never discussed at either a joint select committee meeting or a standing committee on any level. And one immediate example now is the battering that citizens are suffering from noise. That has been going on for decades. Anytime you open a newspaper, if you open the Express today, you will see a story about it. Anytime you look at Letter City Editor, you will see about it. You turn on your radio and you hear about it. But these issues do not find themselves being discussed at the level of committees. And all of these things relate to my main point, which is that disconnect between Parliament and people. And that ultimately the way to get around systems that are not working is to have citizens have access and do their own oversight on these matters.
Okay, you're watching the Oval on Oversight, and we're discussing the role of oversight committees in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And I'll come to you, Mr. Tyson. When we started our discussion this morning, I had indicated that this week we have had a number of activities, and it's all geared towards talking about and actually trying to achieve a model for parliamentary oversight for Trinidad and Tobago in the context of Trinidad and Tobago, building on what may be international practices, because sometimes it is important for us to see where we are, what we have that is useful and works, and what needs to be improved. And your various contributions today will help us to distill some further points which were not discussed yesterday, and I'll go through them in a little while, that we ought to consider as we want to build a model for Trinidad and Tobago that is in the context of Trinidad and Tobago. So, Mr. Tyson, you had a point?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Talking a bit about accessibility, I'm very much afraid for the next generation, because I wonder sometimes if our education system is relevant. We burden them with passing exams, but they are not taught the real things, like, for example, civics, how the parliament works. And I think that should be taught to a child from the age of maybe 5 or 6 years old. So when they get older, they already understand it, they'll be aware of it already, and be able to have robust discussions on Parliament. But now we have a disconnect, because the average young person, and I like to consider myself young still, don't understand what's going on, and sometimes don't care because they think it is not relevant to them. But it has to be taught in school. Our educational system is really irrelevant. So you're getting persons who can pass this exam and can pass that, but don't even understand how the Parliament works.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. McKenzie.
Yes. During the discussion, we've been talking about part-time members of Parliament, the executive overpowering the legislature and so on. But about 2 years ago, a group of us went around to people discussing amendments to the THA Act, and some suggestions were given about amendments to the Constitution, and the same thing came up. One of the things well, at least I see, that came up was that the Senate, independent and opposition benches combined should exceed the number on the government bench. Second point that came up was that elected members of parliament should not be legislatures. In other words, they were saying, you are elected, you represent this constituency, you confine yourself to representing the people. Now, I am not saying whether people agreed or not, but this was a suggestion. And staff the parliament with legislators. In other words, a member of parliament elected by the people doesn't have to be in the house debating and so on and so on. That was one of the ideas that came up, that we shouldn't have and so on. I elect you for this constituency. You don't have to be minister of this or minister of that. That was one of the suggestions that came up. Wild, but it was brought up.
Okay. So over the course of our conversation, we've had a number of points placed on the table, if you will. The whole question of needing to, as we work towards building a model for more effective committee oversight in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, that we must obviously consider the socio-economic culture of the country. We need to bear in mind that there could be a lack of intent, a lack of will by some politicians or some members of parliament to really take the whole question of oversight very seriously. One person indicated that the whole question of privilege and the fact that oversight is a privilege and it ought to be taken more seriously is something that we need to work towards. Education and training of parliamentarians about committee oversight was mentioned. We just heard from Mr. Tyson about our education system and how we are educating our youngsters to understand our government, our parliament, governance, and their responsibility as they become adults in our society. The whole question of fear of exposure as we talk about corruption. We had a point made about access or lack thereof to Parliament, and the fact that we need to have civil society have access to the Parliament in a more tangible way. Constitution reform also has to be considered. What really is the purpose of oversight? We talked about the fact that there is insufficient backbenchers, and therefore we may not have adequate dissension at times, and that we are in a culture where people are punished for dissent, and that we need to, where possible, constrain the executive, and perhaps the problem needs to be fixed at the level of the Senate. So there were a number of significant points that were raised here today that would have to be distilled, if you will, as we begin to build or refashion our model for committee oversight in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And at this juncture then, I would wish to ask Professor Stapenhurst to perhaps give us a few closing remarks and maybe recommendations. Pardon me?
The floor is closed now.
You wish me to open the floor again, Mr. Daly?
Just ask.
I was trying to do that. But if you have something that's burning that you would
it
wish
seems
to
clear
say.
to me that the trend, I wouldn't like to say the consensus, but the trend in the room is that the problem with parliamentary oversight in Trinidad and Tobago is lack of political will. So, I mean, if this is to be taken forward, wherever this report goes, it has to say that the trend of the conversation was that there's a lack of political will.
Okay.
So I was just concerned that we weren't distilling that, you know.
No, I did say that. Yes, I did say it. Sorry, sir, that you didn't hear me. I may not have said it.
My apologies.
That's all right. That's okay. Yes. Mr. Vieira.
I would just like to add that I think some of the key planks that underpin oversight are also underserved. We have an ombudsman's office that is really lacking and moribund. And the Auditor General's department, which I see as so critical, I don't know if they're understaffed, if they're
We did talk
undermotivated,
about that
if
yesterday.
they've been castrated,
Yes.
but you don't get the support and the depth that you should be getting. So I think that if we're going to go for oversight, we need to really pay attention to beefing up those offices. And I would also say, I think we would, the UK has a scrutiny unit that we could consider looking at where committees that are lacking can get access to experts. So,
All right, thank you. Professor, your 2 minutes of fame.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I mean, basic principles. If a government does not wish to be held accountable, no matter what one does in terms of parliamentary oversight, it cannot be held accountable. In other words, democracy is lessened because government does not wish to be accountable to the people. Secondly, I'd like to make a comment on political will being shaped by culture. Of course. But there's 178 countries in the world, and each country has its own culture. And so while we can look around the world and learn from others, everybody's culture is unique. And let's be careful not to, for every country to say, we're so unique, there's nothing we can learn from somebody else. We have to wholly look inside. And I'd like to, with regards to that, the one country that's had a major change in our generation has been South Africa. And when it moved to being a democracy, indeed, committee hearings for the first time were held outside of Parliament in different parts of the country. And I think that was a great mechanism that worked in South Africa. All right, now to sum up, I'm very reluctant to be prescriptive, as those of you who have met me know. But nonetheless, let me take the power of the pen, so to speak, in summing up to insert some of my own views as well. I think we're agreed on the assumption that governments wish to be or are prepared to be accountable to the citizens, that oversight is important. I think also we are agreed that there's a lack of understanding, both among the public about what oversight is, and how important it is, and of MPs in how to do oversight. I was struck by Dr. McKenzie's comment earlier that what is needed here is a cocktail. We need to try a little bit of this, we need to try a little bit of that. We don't know a priori what that cocktail is, but we need to start mixing it. There's no silver bullet, but let's not use political or other excuses not to start mixing the cocktail.
What was that, Sunity?
Hopefully it's not a Molotov.
The point that was just made by my colleague in terms of independent oversight institutions, I think can't be underscored enough. Having the trappings of oversight institutions that don't have the power, that don't have the autonomy, that don't have the resources, isn't going to lead to anything. Awareness raising and training for members of Parliament and the public, both on the role of Parliament in general and of oversight in particular, absolutely imperative. Because if the people don't demand oversight, if they don't demand accountable government, then there's little that can be done. Not surprising, a lack of consensus in terms of time constraints and pay for members of Parliament. I certainly heard a minority report in the process here in terms of that issue. There's no tradition here of backbenchers, I understand. Everybody wants to be a minister. One way to get around that, I think, is the example shown in Ghana, another Westminster system, and this works for them. I'm not saying this should be tried here, but it's worth looking at. Initially, half the ministers appointed by government were from outside of Parliament. That was so successful, they're now moving to all ministers being appointed from outside of Parliament. Westminster system,
yes,
but that suits their culture.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Stapenhurst. And at this time, I would like to invite President of the Senate, Senator the Honourable Christine Kangaloo, to give her closing comments.
Well, I just want to thank everyone for being here today. It's interesting sitting in where I am sitting, next to Mr. Daly included, but also in my position. I'm listening to the comments that have been shared today. When we started this week, the Speaker and I, we started with a lot of optimism. And we still think from the perspective of Parliament that there's a lot to be hopeful for. We have new standing orders, and you immediately are seeing the effects of those new standing orders, because we have the speaking time of members has been shortened, and we are, I think, seeing where contributions are more focused. They have to be. We are seeing that ministers having to make statements, again, those statements have to be more focused. And I think that works for the betterment of Parliament and for the public to look on and understand what Parliament is more about. We started this week with optimism because we have, under the new standing orders, a lot of more joint select committees operating, and therefore we took the opportunity to have this workshop. And we were encouraged, I mean, Madam Speaker will speak after me, but we were encouraged by the attendance. And we were encouraged by what, across the board, the comments that members of Parliament were making about what they wanted to get out of the committees and how they wanted to perform in the committees. So that is optimism for us. There are things that we have no control over in the positions that we now hold. We can try to do our very best to make Parliament more effective. And we have sought to have the training and the exposure of the new members of Parliament as well to what these committees can produce and what the oversight functions of these committees. I was, from the at the very outset, the clerk of the House spoke to us about these committees and the fact that we have to move away, that Parliament and parliamentarians have to move away from just thinking of being on the floor on a Friday or on a Tuesday. That these committees now and what the functions, the oversight functions, will add so much to the power of Parliament. And therefore, to me, even though I've heard all the comments about what we need to do culturally, what came across to me in the workshops is that there's a certain level of maturity that is required. Some call it culture. I will say maturity on the part of parliamentarians. And let us just hope that with these workshops we can move into a new era while still trying and attempting as a country to work on the issues that we see affecting us. So I thank everyone for the comments, and as I say, I end this week, this workshop, with optimism as we move forward. So
thank you, Madam President. And I'll now invite the Speaker of the House, Honourable Bridgid Annisette-George, to please make a few closing remarks as well.
Thank you,
Madam
Janine.
Speaker.
Again, I want to thank everyone here who's taken their precious time to participate in this discussion. I think this is a true display of what is required of a citizen. I endorse the comments of the Honourable President of the Senate. I just want to add a few more comments in that I was heartened by the contribution by Dr. Rampersad in terms of saying that there are a lot of big ticket items that we need to fix. But right now we have certain structures. Let's look at them.
Right.
There is a great time span between fixing the big ticket items and where we are. Let's deal with that. And her comment about the accessibility of Parliament, while centered on the physical aspect, which yes, may be something to fix, and let's hope that when we get our real home, which is still going to be centered in Port of Spain, some of the accessibility issues will be fixed. And there are some little things, I guess, that we can look at. But I think this whole week was really intended to make a step in making Parliament more accessible, the education. The education in terms of our public and the education in terms of our MPs. And I think what this week has shown is that education is really important. A lot of emphasis has been placed on the representation function of parliamentarians. And I think Trevor, as a former parliamentarian, understands, and he said it well, in that I don't think an MP has much invested in the oversight function because that doesn't really get him a vote.
That's right.
So that a lot of emphasis has been before placed on representation. I think now that in terms of the political will, the fact that we have now 13 oversight committees, which has been agreed to by the Parliament, shows that maybe parliamentarians are beginning, and might be very, very rudimentary, beginning to understand the importance of oversight. I think the point made by former Senator Vieira, and like Martin, I will call him Anthony, is really very valid in that, one, I don't think before parliamentarians understood the importance, or even understood what oversight is. And the question about being properly resourced. And there may be some validity that may be part of the approach to it is because maybe parliamentarians themselves feel that it's something they themselves can't even handle.
Yes.
That they may be inclined to approach it in a sort of frivolous manner. So let's hope that with the education and some sort of resourcing that we can begin to get the oversight to function. I think the issue pointed out, and I'm not going to deal with part-time, full-time. I understand the point made by Sunity, and I accept that.
Yes.
By making full-time, you may be just chasing money after, pushing money behind and not really solving the issue. But in terms of dealing with the issue, I think that with will and with the public too understanding that there is an oversight function and demanding that their parliamentarians perform it. If there are reports, the reports have to be tabled before the plenary and again have to be debated. Again, your public seeing that there have been reports, there have been recommendations, and in turn putting public pressure on the committees to say, so where's the follow-up? That we may see some improvement in what exists now.
Yes, thank you.
The discussion, Dr. James and Martin, I think with respect to the larger issues, with respect to constitutional reform, I think there's validity in that discussion continuing. But I think as presiding officers, we are really constrained, and let's hope voices like you all could help that discussion continue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much.
Yes. And so this brings us to the end of the first of a series of very frank and informative discussions on parliamentary oversight and scrutiny. And I would therefore wish to thank all of the panelists, Senate President Christine Kangaloo, House Speaker Bridgid Annisette-George, Dr. Selwyn Ryan, Mr. Kern Tyson, Clerk of the House Jackie Sampson Miguel, Anthony Vieira, Rhoda Bharath, Dr. Winford James, Trevor Sudama, Sunity Maharaj, Dr. Justin Robinson, Dr. Sheila Rampersad, Professor Frederick Stapenhurst, Dr. Eastlyn, McKenzie, and Mr. Martin Daly. Now the conversation doesn't end here. We hope you'll continue to connect with us at the Office of the Parliament by going to our website, www.ttparliament.org, and our social media channels on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. I am Janine Comer, and it's been great having you with us for the Oval Oversight and for this week of activities on parliamentary oversight and scrutiny. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, you're very welcome. Yes.
This has been a presentation of the Parliament Channel and
Parliament Radio 105.5 FM.